Rachel Monroe stepped onto the packed flight from Seattle to D.C., her faded gray hoodie and torn jeans, drawing side eyes from the business class crowd. Olivia Hart, the flight attendant, pointed her to 12F with a smirk. "Economy's full, so you'll just have to sit here," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. A few passengers chuckled, their gazes lingering on Rachel's frayed cuffs and scuffed backpack. She didn't react, just slid into the window seat, stowing her old army green bag under the seat in front. The cabin buzzed with self-important energy. A woman in a crisp blazer flicked her eyes over Rachel, her earrings catching the light as she returned to her phone with a faint sneer. A guy in a pinstripe suit leaned toward his buddy, muttering, "Looks like she missed the bus station." His voice carried just enough for her to hear. Rachel kept her eyes forward, scanning the seat numbers, her face unreadable. She wasn't here to make a point, just to get to D.C. The flight droned on until the plane made an unscheduled stop at Andrews Air Force Base. The cabin went quiet as the F-22 squadron commander boarded, his presence commanding attention. He stopped dead in the aisle, his eyes locking onto Rachel. "Midnight Viper, stand up," he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the plane. Rachel rose, her movements steady, her expression calm. The commander's gaze softened with respect. Minutes later, the runway came into view through the window. Every F-22 pilot stood at attention, their salutes sharp and unanimous, directed at Rachel. The cabin fell silent, the earlier smirks and whispers replaced by stunned stares. Rachel tucked her boarding pass into her hoodie pocket, her fingers steady as ever. She didn't look back at the gawking passengers. She didn't need to. Rachel settled back into 12F, her gaze fixed on the window as the plane taxied away from Andrews Air Force Base. The cabin remained hushed, the earlier chatter replaced by an awkward silence. The woman in the blazer shifted uncomfortably, her phone now forgotten in her lap. The pinstripe suit guy cleared his throat, suddenly engrossed in the in-flight magazine. Olivia Hart, the flight attendant, busied herself with a tray of drinks, avoiding eye contact with Rachel. Outside, the F-22s gleamed under the afternoon sun, their pilots still visible in formation, a silent testament to whatever Rachel had done to earn their respect. Inside, the passengers stole glances at her, curiosity battling their earlier disdain. Rachel didn't notice, or didn't care. She pulled her hoodie's frayed drawstrings tight, then leaned her head against the window, watching the ground crew fade into the distance as the plane prepared for takeoff. The man in the seat next to her, a middle-aged guy with wire-rimmed glasses and a rumpled button-down, finally broke the silence. "So, Midnight Viper, huh?" His voice was cautious, like he was testing the waters. Rachel turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. They were sharp, steady, the kind of eyes that had seen things most people only read about. "Yeah," she said simply, her voice low but clear. No explanation, no elaboration. She turned back to the window. The guy nodded like he'd expected as much and didn't push further. The plane rumbled into the air, the ascent pressing Rachel into her seat. Her backpack, wedged under the seat in front, shifted slightly, the old base patch catching the light for a moment. It was from Nellis, a detail no one else would notice or understand. As the flight leveled off, Olivia Hart made her way down the aisle, her earlier smirk gone. She stopped at Rachel's row, holding a tray with a small bottle of water and a snack pack. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" she asked, the word ma'am sounding like an afterthought, a correction to her earlier tone. Rachel shook her head. "I'm good." Her voice was polite but firm, closing the door on further conversation. Olivia nodded quickly and moved on, her heels clicking a little faster than before. The cabin slowly returned to its usual hum, murmured conversations, the clink of ice in glasses, the rustle of laptops opening, but the energy had shifted. The business class passengers kept their voices lower, their glances more discreet. Rachel didn't seem to notice. She pulled a small dog-eared notebook from her backpack and flipped it open, her pen moving in quick, precise strokes. Whatever she was writing, it wasn't for anyone else's eyes. Hours later, as the plane descended into D.C., the captain's voice crackled over over the intercom. "Folks, we're beginning our approach to Reagan National, and, we've been asked to pass along a message. Midnight Viper, you've got a ride waiting at the gate." A few heads turned, but Rachel just tucked the notebook away, her expression unchanged. When the plane touched down, she grabbed her backpack and stood, moving toward the exit with the same deliberate steps she'd taken boarding. The other passengers parted slightly, giving her space, their earlier judgments replaced by something closer to awe, or maybe fear of what they didn't understand. At the gate, two uniformed airmen waited, their postures rigid, their faces lighting up when they saw her. "Colonel Monroe," one of them said, snapping a salute. "Transport's ready." Rachel nodded, shouldering her bag. She didn't look back at the plane, the passengers, or the life she'd briefly stepped into. She just followed the airmen out, her faded hoodie disappearing into the terminal's crowd, leaving behind a cabin full of people who'd never forget the woman in 12F. Rachel Monroe slid into the back seat of the unmarked black SUV, the door clicking shut behind her with a solid thud. The two airmen up front exchanged a quick nod before the driver pulled away from Reagan National, merging seamlessly into the flow of DC traffic. The city buzzed around them, honking taxis, suited bureaucrats hurrying along sidewalks, the distant hum of helicopters over the Potomac. But inside the vehicle, it was quiet, professional, the kind of silence that came with missions that didn't make the evening news. "Ma'am, we've got about 20 minutes to the Pentagon," the driver said, glancing in the rearview mirror. His voice carried the crisp edge of someone who'd spent years in uniform. "Admiral's already waiting." Rachel gave a slight nod, her eyes scanning the passing landmarks, the Jefferson Memorial, the tidal basin still dotted with late summer tourists. She hadn't been back here in years, not since the debriefs after her last deployment. The city looked the same, monuments standing eternal, politics churning like a never-ending storm. But she felt different, older maybe, wiser definitely. The faded hoodie and jeans weren't just camouflage, they were a reminder that heroes didn't always wear capes or dress blues. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a secure line, no doubt. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a simple message. "Briefing room 4, eyes only." She tucked it away, leaning back against the leather seat. The backpack rested at her feet, its contents light but heavy with significance. A few classified drives, her notebook filled with sketches of flight patterns and tactics that had saved lives over hostile skies. As the SUV approached the Pentagon's massive facade, Rachel's mind drifted back to that flight. The smirks, the whispers, they were nothing new. She'd faced worse in the field, where doubt could get you killed. But the salute from those F-22 pilots, that was real. It was for the missions she'd flown as Midnight Viper, the call signs etched into Air Force lore. Night raids over enemy lines, evading SAMs with maneuvers that pushed the limits of physics and grit. She'd been the first woman to lead a squadron in combat like that, breaking barriers without fanfare, just results. The vehicle rolled to a stop at a secure entrance, flanked by armed guards who snapped to attention as she stepped out. One of them, a young sergeant with wide eyes, murmured, "It's an honor, Colonel." Rachel offered a brief smile, the kind that said she appreciated it but didn't need the spotlight, and followed her escorts inside. The halls were a maze of polished floors and echoing footsteps, walls lined with portraits of generals and admirals who'd shaped the nation's defense. They reached the briefing room, a heavy door swinging open to reveal a table surrounded by high-ranking officers. At the head sat Admiral Hargrove, his uniform starched, his face weathered from decades of service. "Colonel Monroe," he said, standing as she entered. The room followed suit, chairs scraping back in unison. "Welcome back. We've got a situation that needs your expertise." Rachel set her backpack down and took her seat, the weight of the room's attention settling on her like an old flight suit. No disdain here, no judgments, just respect earned the hard way. As the briefing began, maps and intel flashing on screens, she dove in, her voice steady, her insights sharp. Outside, DC carried on, oblivious to the quiet guardians like her who kept the skies safe. But in that room, Rachel wasn't just a woman in a hoodie. She was Midnight Viper, and America slept better because of people like her. The briefing room hummed with the low whir of projectors and the shuffle of classified folders. Admiral Hargrove leaned forward, his fingers steepled as satellite imagery flickered across the wall-sized screen, jagged mountain ranges in a volatile region halfway around the world, dotted with heat signatures that screamed trouble. We've got intel on a rogue faction arming up with next-gen drones, ones that could slip past our standard defenses, he said, his voice gravelly from too many late nights. They're targeting Allied assets, and if they launch, it'll be a mess we can't afford. Rachel studied the maps, her mind already mapping out vectors and evasion patterns. The other officers, generals with rows of rib